Good evening and welcome to the June 14th edition of Office Hours presented by the Maryland Center for Collegiate Financial Wellness. My name is Dr. Tisa Silver Kennedy, and I'm so happy to be here with you all this evening, and I'm looking forward to answering many of your questions. Before I get into the questions that have been submitted by our community, I want to give you a brief overview of the center as well as the program that you're attending tonight, Office Hours. So the Maryland Center for Collegiate Financial Wellness was founded in 2021 with the vision that all college and career school students in Maryland would be able to achieve these 6 pillars of collegiate financial wellness. They are being creditworthy, ready, resilient, empowered, successful, and thriving. We are on a mission to help students and families build their financial life skills and empowering them to thrive. If you'd like to learn more about the mission and vision of the Maryland Center for Collegiate Financial Wellness, I encourage you to visit us online at mccfw.org. There you'll find links to resources, dates for future programs, and opportunities to support even financially if you feel inclined to do so. As for tonight's specific program, Office Hours has been up and running since December of 2021. This is our free semi-monthly virtual student loan clinic that provides borrowers with a trusted venue to help them navigate student loans and prepare for financial success beyond repayment. Now, before I get into the questions for this evening, I have to issue a disclaimer. Office Hours is being presented for informational purposes only, and it should not be construed as personal, financial, or legal advice. We do our best to provide you with unbiased and accurate information, but there's so many things that are changing in addition to the fact that your student loans are very personal. Everyone's borrowing journey is different, and so will your path to a zero balance. So while we strive to give you the best information available, we also recognize that there's more information that you need to take into account before you make any decisions. So now that I've got that out of the way, I want to get straight into the questions that have been submitted from our community. And the first one has to do with public service loan forgiveness. The question is, I had my loans forgiven through PSLF. I heard the government wants to take it back. Am I going to have to repay the debt even though it was discharged? And this is a very popular question because there have been a lot of talk in the news about having public service loan forgiveness reversed for those who have actually had their debt officially discharged. So I wanted to give some background before explaining what ended up happening with that situation. So last month, the House of Representatives was considering a Student Debt Congressional Review Act, or a CRA resolution. That resolution had several tenets. I'm listing 4 for you. The first one is that it would undo the extension of the payment pause, so people will be forced right back into repayment. The second thing that it would do is reverse waived interest. I think that was up to a period of 9 months. So for the past 9 months where we've been included in this payment pause and also a pause on the accrual of interest, they would reverse that and make borrowers have to repay that interest that would have accumulated over the past 9 months had it not been for the pause. The third condition was that it would reverse credit gained toward public service through the limited PSLF waiver. And the fourth condition was that it would actually reinstate debt that was discharged through the public service loan forgiveness program. So that means that people who had met the requirements, had achieved that 120 qualifying payment landmark, would have had their debt reinstated. The discharge would have been reversed, and they would have again been held responsible for that debt, even though it had been discharged by the U.S. Treasury. So what ended up happening was on May the 24th, the resolution was actually approved by the House of Representatives. It was forwarded to the U.S. Senate, and on June 1st, the Senate approved the resolution as well. On June 7th, it made it to the desk of President Biden, and he vetoed the resolution. So the bottom line is, debt that has been discharged through public service loan forgiveness will not be reinstated. So if you have had your debt discharged by way of public service loan forgiveness, you do not have to worry about that debt coming back. And I just wanted to add a bit of a comment here from the well-being perspective with borrowers. When a borrower has their debt approved by way of public service loan forgiveness, I can tell you 100% of the people that called me and said, I got this letter, what does this mean? Even when I explained to them that this letter meant that their debt was 100% discharged, they were no longer responsible for payments, no one believed me the first time around. I had a lot of convincing to do because a lot of people have been just distrustful of the student loan financing system, and also just not believing that PSLF could work for them. So when it did work for them, they still couldn't accept it. I had to convince them that it was true and it was happening. So just think about a person who has been in this system for 10 plus years, finally meets the requirements to have a debt cleared, and then hears that their federal legislators are attempting to claw back and take away those benefits. That is not, that situation is not conducive to financial wellness. It's not conducive to wellness at all. So many of you who've attended previous editions of Office Hours might notice that I did not mention this, and I did not mention it on purpose because one, I didn't believe that it would end up being approved. And because of that, I did not want people to go through unnecessary stress thinking about the possibility that this debt that they recently had discharged was going to be reinstated. So I'm happy to see that the resolution was unsuccessful. And it's really a pleasure to just remind people that if you had your debt approved through public service loan forgiveness, you do not have to worry about the government coming back to tell you that that decision has been reversed, the debt's reinstated, and you're responsible for it. So that forgiveness was real, and the debt that's been discharged will not be reinstated. All right, let's move on to our second question. The second question is, I'm going to borrow a student loan this fall. Will I get the 0% interest rate? So this brings us right back to the payment pause that has been in effect since March of 2020. In addition to the pause on payments being required, there was also a pause on interest accrual. So for the past 3 years, those of us who have student loans outstanding have not seen our balances rise due to the accrual of interest. However, that's changing. Interest is going to start accruing again in September. And for people who are taking out loans this fall, those loans will not be included in the pause that began March of 2020. That's coming to an end. So I just wanted to share with you the rates for the next academic year on federal student loans. So for direct subsidized loans and unsubsidized loans, the rate is 5.5%. For direct unsubsidized loans for graduate or professional school borrowers, the rate is higher. It's a 7.05%. As for PLUS loans, those are loans that are issued to graduate and professional students or parents who are borrowing for their children's education. For this upcoming academic year, the interest rate is going to be 8.05%. You'll notice that the rates are different. They're lower for undergraduate students, they're higher for graduate and professional borrowers and for parents, and it's been that way for a long time. And when it comes to how these interest rates work, the interest rates are determined annually. So that's why you'll notice the rates that I've given you for 2023 to 2024 are just that. They're for 1 year. If you turn around and borrow another student loan for the next academic year, the rates are likely to be different because those rates are determined annually. Even though the rates are determined annually, once you have a loan, the rate on that loan is the rate for the life of the loan. So for each loan, the rate is fixed, but it's possible each year that you will have different interest rates on the loans in your portfolio. Also, the interest rate is not to be confused with the origination fee. The origination fee is separate. It's something that's charged up front. It is also kept by the Department of Education once a student's loan is dispersed. So the origination fee is something that comes out before the funds reach the student. That's different from interest. The origination fee is subtracted up front, and then once the funds have been dispersed to the student's account, on unsubsidized loans, interest accrues beginning on day one. So the interest rates for this year, I just want to show you a chart that compares those rates and also lists the origination fees. For undergraduate students that are taking out direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans, sometimes we hear those referred to, oh, excuse me, I hit my straw. Sometimes we hear those referred to as Stafford loans. The rate on those is 5.5%. For graduate professional students who are borrowing direct unsubsidized loans, the rate is 7.05%. And for graduate professional students and Parent Plus loan borrowers, the rate is 8.05%. You'll notice that when you look at the origination fee for PLUS loans versus the origination fee for those direct unsubsidized and subsidized loans, there's a huge difference. The origination fee on Parent PLUS loans is 4 times the size of the origination fee on the loans for undergraduate students and direct unsubsidized loans for graduate and professional students. So if you are a parent and you're thinking about taking out a loan for your child's education, just make sure that you're aware of all of the costs that come along with it, the origination fee that's cut out at the beginning, and the interest that's going to accrue beginning on day one. And if your student is borrowing for the next academic year, you can expect that these rates will change. All right, next question. I heard the debt ceiling deal ended the payment pause. Is it true? And if so, when are my payments due? So this question has to do with the return to repayment and when it's going to take place. So the debt ceiling has been all over the news for quite some time, and there was a deal reached, but student loan borrowers were included inside of that deal, specifically the payment pause. Within that debt ceiling deal, there was a condition that the payment pause could not be extended again. The current payment pause was set to expire at the end of August anyway, but now it cannot be extended again because that condition was included in the debt ceiling deal. Interest will resume September 1st of this year, and payments are expected to resume in October. Now, prior to this debt ceiling deal, payments were set to resume 60 days after either June 30th of 2023 or 60 days after the Supreme Court decision regarding the Biden-Harris student debt relief plan. So either way, we were looking at the end of August as knowing that we were going to return to repayment. But just in case the Biden administration was thinking about issuing another extension, other parties made sure that it was included in that debt ceiling deal that the payment pause could not be extended again. So the end of August is definitely what we're looking at, with interest set to resume in September, payments set to resume in October. As for when your specific payment is due, you will have to contact your servicer. You can log into studentaid.gov. We'll walk through the steps soon, but you want to make sure that you know exactly when your payment is due, and your servicer would have that information for each loan. All right, we've got another PSLF question here. The question is, I don't have a payment count, and I sent my PSLF application in before the October 31st, 2022 deadline. Any advice? I have lots to say about this, but with PSLF, the application process is still evolving because originally there were changes implemented in October 2021 that was associated with the limited PSLF waiver. Even after the implementation of the waiver, more changes came about. So the process is evolving for borrowers. What I'm sharing with you in terms of this typical timeline is based on the experiences of the borrowers that I have interacted with. So for people who submitted their PSLF applications by way of traditional mail or fax, usually the turnaround time for them to receive an up-to-date qualifying payment count is about 3 to 4 months. And the official language that we've seen has been that you can expect the process to take up to 90 business days, which is about 4 months. As for people who are using the electronic signature that became available through studentaid.gov just last month, it's really too soon for us to tell. I've worked with some people who have had their applications reviewed in less than a week, but I have others who have also used that feature and are still waiting for a payment count. So it's just a bit too early for me to say how long it takes because the experiences are so varied, and the completely electronic version did not become available until just last month. So it's too soon to tell, but I will definitely report back experiences as they are shared with me. Now, there are some outliers, specifically for applications that were sent first to the previous PSLF servicer instead of MOHELA. Last summer, the prior servicer was a company called Fed Loan Servicing, and they had been the PSLF servicer for years. Late in the summer, Fed Loan Servicing exited the business and PSLF applications were transferred over to MOHELA. I have dealt with several people who submitted their applications to Fed Loan and did not hear anything from MOHELA, contacted MOHELA and they were told, well, you just should submit another one. So some things that appears were lost in translation. They could be found because we're still dealing with issues around this transition. But if it's been a really long time, like if you submitted something a year ago and you've heard nothing, that's entirely too long. You definitely need to reach out to MOHELA. And if it's been a year, it would be time for you to submit another PSLF application anyway. So I would try to get an online account with MOHELA. If you're able to establish one and log in, you can check the status of your PSLF application. If you don't see one listed there, then that lets you know you definitely need to send another one in. Also, people that submitted a PSLF application without consolidating their loans, I've noticed that their applications, at least for the people that deal with me, their applications have taken longer to be evaluated than people who consolidated and submitted a PSLF application. I'm not sure what the reason is for that, but it is a pattern that I've noticed. Also, people who chose to use the paper PSLF application instead of completing the form in the PSLF help tool have experienced much longer wait times. And again, this is from the borrower population that I've dealt with directly. The paper application is out there. You can easily find it as a PDF, completely blank, and you can write things in and then send that form off to MOHELA. The problem with this is that when you download the blank application and write things in and check the boxes manually, you're just exposing yourself to greater opportunities to make mistakes. And if you make a mistake on the application, that can cause your application to take a longer time to be evaluated. It could also cause the application, excuse me, to get flat out rejected, and you have to fill out another one. So if you are in this process, I would strongly recommend using the PSLF help tool to complete the application, because what the help tool will do is it will start off by asking you for the employer identification number of the organization. Based on that EIN, there's information that's going to be pulled from the Department of Education's database that will populate the form correctly for you. Whereas if you download the blank paper form and you check boxes and do this manually, if your handwriting is illegible, if you mess up a digit on the EIN, if you check the wrong box for employer type, these are all things that will cause your application to be delayed or rejected. So please use the PSLF help tool at studentaid.gov/PSLF to increase your chances of submitting an error-free application. The last category of borrowers who have been experiencing a lengthy waiting time for their application are borrowers who submitted a PSLF application using an employer ID number that was not in the Department of Education's database of qualifying employers. As I mentioned with the previous point, when you use the PSLF help tool, the starting place is the employer ID number. That employer ID number is used to search a database and come up with matches. If the employer is listed in the database as eligible, then you can just click the button next to that employer and the fields of the application will be filled for you. But if you have an organization that is not included in the database, that means that there's some additional information that you need to provide, or that the Department of Education or their servicer would need to find to confirm that the employer is definitely a qualifying employer for PSLF. I have seen this process sit at a standstill for some people. I'm thinking about one borrower in particular who had originally filed paperwork with Fed Loan well before the limited waiver, and the employer ID number was questioned, but the borrower did not receive an answer for about a year and a half. Fortunately, we were able to work together and figure it out what was wrong with the employer ID number. We had a situation where the employer ID number that was on this particular employee's W-2 was part of a subsidiary that rolled up to a larger nonprofit organization. And using the ID number of the larger nonprofit organization allowed the application to finally move forward and be evaluated. But that entire process took about 2 years. So if you enter the employer ID number into the PSLF help tool and the result comes up as undetermined or not in the database, And you'll need to provide additional documentation to support that this organization should be a qualifying employer for the purposes of PSLF. If you're going to go that route, I don't want to discourage you, but I do want to tell you, if you work for a for-profit company, don't bother, because for-profit companies do not qualify for PSLF. This is strictly for government agencies or nonprofit organizations that provide certain types of services to the public. If it's a for-profit organization, it will not qualify, so you shouldn't even apply with that. All right, so as for suggestions, my first suggestion is, if you have applied for PSLF, you should definitely set up an online account with MOHELA. You can do that at mohela.com. Once you log into MOHELA, you want to take a look at the PSLF menu on that blue navigation bar. When you click the drop-down arrow, you'll see a long list of items, and toward the very end, you should see something called the payment tracker. If you've logged in and you don't see the payment tracker, it could be because you have not been granted full access to MOHELA's online platform yet, but hopefully it will come to you soon. The payment tracker will allow you to look at your eligible payments, ineligible payments, qualifying payments, as well as your employment. So once you log in, you can go to PSLF, Payment Tracker, and click on that Employment tab to see the list of employers that MOHELA has considered for you inside of your PSLF application. If you see the employers are listed, you want to make sure that all of the employment for each of those employers has been counted toward your qualifying payments. So you can view the payments by going to, again, the PSLF menu, go to the payment tracker, and then take a look at your eligible payments. You'll see a number there, and it's clickable. If you click on the number, you'll be able to see month by month which months have had employment verified to match them. So if you see a full list of your employers, but you see a discrepancy on that list of eligible payments and employment certification, then you'll know there's something about the process that has not been completed yet. And if there's something that remains outstanding for a long time, I highly recommend contacting MOHELA to ask about the status of that application. All right, and as a reminder about the PSLF help tool, I am constantly discouraging people from using the blank PSLF application and using the PSLF help tool to complete the form. And the PSLF help tool has become even more convenient for borrowers. Just last month, the Department of Education launched this fully electronic version of the application. So for quite some time, we've been able to use the help tool to pull the employers based on their EIN, to add starting and ending dates. But there was still a manual piece of that process, in that you had to take the PDF that was generated by the help tool, send it to someone at an organization for them to sign. They had to send it back to you, and then you had to send that form to MOHELA. Now the process has been simplified so that you can complete everything in the PSLF help tool. The Department of Education will use DocuSign to forward the application via email to each organization that you work for. Once the representative from that organization has signed the form using DocuSign, the form comes back to the Department of Education, and the Department of Education will send that form directly to MOHELA for you. So a lot of the work has been removed. A lot of the security concerns have been removed, because there are many people that I've helped them work through these PSLF applications online, and they're ready to email it to a person at the employer's organization to sign. But the form includes of course, your name, address, email, as well as your social security number. It's not safe to send that type of information via email. So now that the electronic signature option is available, you don't have to worry about that. DocuSign will send the representative at the organization everything they need to verify. They'll verify it. It comes back to the Department of Ed. Department of Ed sends it to MOHELA. So it's a much more convenient process. And from what I've seen so far, it has been moving more quickly, but I need more time to be able to observe how this process is working for borrowers. All right, next question. I haven't made a payment in 3 years, and I don't know who to pay or how much to pay. Help. So I took this question to mean repayment is returning. What can I do to get ready? The first thing I'd recommend is logging into studentaid.gov. If you're in studentaid.gov, you will be able to find the history of every single federal student loan you have ever borrowed, regardless of the institution you attended, when you attended, who the servicer is. It's all going to be listed in there. So you log into studentaid.gov, view your loans and loan types. Also, view your servicers. The other thing you can review when you go to the loan breakdown section is the repayment plan that you're currently enrolled in. You might see that you're listed in a balance-driven plan, and some of you might be enrolled in income-driven repayment plan. But you want to know what type of plan you're enrolled in. You also want to take a look at what the payment is expected to be and ask yourself truly, is this payment affordable? You can explore your repayment options through studentaid.gov as well using a tool that they have called the loan simulator. And the loan simulator will show you estimates for what repayment will look like under all of the balance-driven plans, as well as the income-driven plans. And if you decide you want to enroll in an income-driven repayment plan, you can complete that application online at studentaid.gov as well. So after you've taken care of the studentaid.gov piece, I highly recommend updating your contact information with your servicer. Studentaid.gov is a portal of the federal government. That's why you can see every federal loan you've ever taken out therein. However, it's possible to have multiple loans and multiple servicers. So you want to make sure that you know who your servicers are and that your servicers know how to get in contact with you. So for the servicers, you would have to log on to their platforms and make sure that they have up-to-date contact information for you. And that's where you can also find the due date for your next payment. As far as the loan types, I mentioned this before. Federal loans have been included in a payment pause that went into effect in March of 2020, but that's a specific type of federal loans, direct loans and federally held federal student loans. There are other federal student loans that are federal, but they're technically commercially held. That means that private banks were involved in their origination. With commercially held loans, they were not included in the payment pause. So there really won't be an adjustment for people who've had commercially held loans, because for many of them, they've been in repayment all throughout the payment pause that was offered to direct loan borrowers and borrowers with federally held student loans. So if you have a commercially held loan, you're not experiencing, the shock of a return to repayment. But if you also had direct loans, now you'll be experiencing paying on those commercially held loans as well as the direct loans at the same time. So there could be an adjustment, going back into repayment on those direct loans that have not been in repayment for the past 3 years. What I would suggest that you do is consider consolidating your loans to benefit from the IDR adjustment. However, if you have commercially held loans and federally held loans, I'm suggesting that you wait until after the Supreme Court decision on the Biden-Harris Student Debt Relief Plan. We're expecting that decision later this month. The reason why I'm suggesting that you wait is because the way that the plan ended up before it was blocked and before everything rose to the Supreme Court level was that commercially held loans were not eligible for relief under the Biden-Harris plan. They started out with a pathway to being included, but that pathway was removed due to a lawsuit. So once the plan was blocked, commercially held loans were not allowed to be included in that relief plan. However, federally held loans could be included in the relief. If you have a mix of those two types of loans and you consolidate them, it's possible for your federally held loans to lose eligibility for the Biden-Harris relief plan because they've been mixed with commercially held loans that were not eligible for relief under that Biden-Harris student debt relief plan. For that reason, just because I don't know how this is going to work out, we'll have to wait to hear from the Supreme Court. So because we don't know how this is going to work out, I'm suggesting that if you are planning to consolidate commercially held loans and federally held loans, that you might want to hold off until that Supreme Court decision so that you don't jeopardize any of your eligibility for relief on those federally held loans. The good thing is it's June 14th. We're expecting a decision from the Supreme Court later this month. And the time to consolidate for the greatest benefit under the IDR adjustment doesn't end until December 31st of this year. So we'll still have several months for people who have those older commercially held loans to consolidate and get on track to benefit most greatly from the IDR adjustment. All right, next question. Shifting gears a little bit here. It says, I was watching TV and an executive from a private lender said refinancing would save me money. I have about $20,000 left. Should I refinance? So the question is, refinancing is now a good time? Before I actually answer the question, I want to make sure that everyone is clear on what refinancing is and how refinancing differs from consolidating loans through the federal government. So this person, although they didn't say so, I'm assuming that they have federal student loans. If they have federal student loans, that means that the federal government is their lender. When it comes to the federal government being your lender, that means that you are entitled to federal student loan benefits. If you take federal student loans and you refinance them with a private lender, your lender will no longer be the federal government. Your federal student loans will be paid off and a new private loan will be originated with the lender being that private bank. So you're changing lenders when you refinance. You're going from the federal government over to a private lender. Once you do that, you lose all eligibility for federal student loan benefits. Some of the benefits you might not have been eligible for to begin with, but you will lose access to all of them if you refinance your federal student loans with a private lender. So let's take a look at the difference in the lender, the terms, and the benefits. As I mentioned before, when you refinance, your lender goes from the Department of Education or the federal government over to a private bank. The terms of a loan, once it's been refinanced with a private lender, will vary by lender. So it is possible that your refinanced loan could have a lower interest rate than the rates on your original federal student loans. But you have to take a look at what you stand to save in interest and what you could stand to lose in terms of benefits. Some of the benefits that you will lose will be eligibility for income-driven repayment plans. And you become ineligible for the Biden-Harris relief plan if you had been eligible before and if that plan is allowed to move forward. You also would not have access to programs like public service loan forgiveness, teacher loan forgiveness, or any other benefit that is afforded to federal student loan borrowers. So the main motivation when it comes to refinancing is interest rate savings for a lot of people. But you again have to look at, are the interest rate savings worth the other things that you stand to lose? There is an alternative to refinancing with a private lender, and that is consolidating federal loans through the federal government. When you consolidate federal student loans, all you're doing is restructuring the debt. The lender will still be the federal government, but your existing loans will be paid off and a new loan will be originated for the exact same amount. As for the terms of the loan, the terms of federal student loans are the same for all borrowers. The interest rate on a consolidation loan will be linked to the interest rates on the underlying loans that were consolidated. So if you had 10 loans and those loans had interest rates ranging from 4 to 7%, if you consolidate with the federal government, you will have one new loan and the interest rate on that consolidation loan will be somewhere between 4 and 7%. The way that the interest rate is calculated will be using a weighted average of those individual rates on your existing student loans. So when it comes to interest rate savings, that's not going to happen. That's definitely not a reason why anyone consolidates their loans through the federal government. It could be that they want to have fewer servicers. They want to have, a smaller number of loans, even though the amount of the debt is going to be the same. Or they might want to make sure that all of their loans are eligible for income-driven repayment and public service loan forgiveness or other forgiveness programs. So there's several reasons to consolidate within the federal government. Interest rate savings is not one of them. However, if you consolidate your loans through the federal government, you will maintain eligibility for income-driven repayment plans. If you were eligible for the Biden-Harris relief plan, you would maintain eligibility for that as well. You also have access to public service loan forgiveness, teacher loan forgiveness, and other programs depending on your career choice. If you refinance, none of those options will be available to you. So in this example, we had a person who says they have about $20,000 left and they want to know, is this a good time to refinance? Refinancing is a very personal decision. So I want to walk through this for this specific borrower. The first question I would ask is, do you know if you're eligible for the Biden-Harris Student Debt Relief Plan? The Biden-Harris Student Debt Relief Plan is set to provide up to $20,000 worth of cancellation per eligible borrower. So if you are eligible for $20,000 worth of cancellation and you refinance your loans with a private lender, you will no longer be eligible for that $20,000 worth of cancellation. So if you are eligible for the Biden-Harris plan and you want to know what to do right now, I would suggest you wait until the Supreme Court makes its decision. If the Supreme Court rules that the Biden-Harris Student Debt Relief Plan is allowed to move forward, then you need to make sure that you apply for that plan, and you should have $20,000 canceled. That's if you meet the criteria of that program. If you are not eligible for the Biden-Harris Student Debt Relief Plan, then you may want to consider the refinance. When you're considering the refinance, though, I want you to also think about your current financial condition in terms of cash flow, your goals, and your preferences. First question about refinancing, aside from the eligibility for that Biden-Harris Student Debt Relief Plan, do you want to start a new repayment term? When you refinance any kind of loan, the existing loan is paid off, a new loan is originated. That means you're starting over a new repayment clock. So we were talking about, say, a mortgage. You've got a 30-year mortgage. You're 15 years into that mortgage and you decide that you want to refinance right now. If you refinance right now for another 30-year term, you're going to start at month one with payment number one out of 360 monthly payments due after you've already made payments for 15 years. So refinancing means that you're going from repaying that debt on the original plan for 30 years to now 45 years because you paid off the old loan, you originated a new loan, and you're starting fresh. So if you're comfortable with starting a new repayment term, that's totally your choice. If you are farther along into repayment, then you might not want to start the repayment term all over again. For instance, if your loans had a 20-year repayment term and you're already 15 years in, you might not want to restart that term over at year one again and have another 20 to 30 years of payments due. If you just entered repayment not too long ago, then restarting the term isn't that big of a deal. But that's a question, again, that each person has to ask themselves. How far are you into this repayment journey already? And do you want to start over with a new repayment term? Also want to say that even if you start over with a new repayment term, you could pay the debt off faster than scheduled if you wanted to, but you're still starting over with a fresh repayment term from day one. The second question is, are there really interest rate savings? We know that if you consolidate your loans through the federal government, there will be no interest rate savings. You're basically just restructuring the debt. A bunch of individual loans are paid off. One jumbo loan now exists, and the interest rate on it is the weighted average of the existing interest rates on the older loans. But when you refinance, private lenders have a range of rates that they could charge. So you may find that your newly refinanced loan has an interest rate that's lower than the rates were on your existing federal loans. Are those interest rate savings large enough to justify you losing access to federal student loan benefits? Next thing I would ask is, are there any fees? Is there an origination fee? Are there, what kind of late fees are there for penalties, late payments? Also, what flexibilities are available for people who are experiencing difficulty in repayment or just for repayment in general? Income-based repayment is an option that you don't typically see with private lenders. That's a hallmark of the federal government. So you definitely want to know what you're getting into before you take those loans away from the federal government and put them into the hands of a private lender. And the last question I always come back to is, will you forfeit other potential benefits? There are deferments, forbearances, which aren't necessarily benefits, but they're there to help you when you experience difficulty with repayment. Does this lender offer those, or are there penalties attached to them? There are so many things to consider, but at the core of this is, it's a very personal decision. It depends on how much you owe, how long you've been in repayment, and your eligibility for federal student benefits. And after you've looked at all of that information, then you can decide, if refinancing makes sense for you. But for this particular person with $20,000 remaining, I could never just say to someone, oh, just go ahead and refinance, because telling someone to do that could have them potentially miss out on the complete erasure of that debt if the Biden-Harris Student Debt Relief Plan moves forward. So give it a couple of weeks, find out what the answer is, confirm your eligibility. And if you're not able to access relief through that plan, then would be the time to seriously consider refinancing if that's something that's in alignment with your current financial condition, your goals, and your preferences. And for a refresher on these student loan relief plans, the Biden-Harris plan is the plan that provides up to $20,000 relief per person. If you're looking for that application, you're not going to find it now because it was taken down once the relief was blocked last fall. If the Supreme Court decides that this plan is allowed to move forward, the online application will be restored. I can tell you from personal experience, it was very quick. It might have been 4 or 5 questions. A lot of it is just personally identifying information. So the plan is allowed to move forward. Once that application is available again, make sure you complete it. And according to the Department of Education, that relief was supposed to be processed once an application is approved. I believe it was supposed to take 6 to 8 weeks before the cancellation was actually processed. So we'll know, hopefully by the next edition of Office Hours on June 28th, we'll have an answer from the Supreme Court. There are 2 other programs that are running. One is Public Service Loan Forgiveness, which has been around since 2007. It's specifically for people who work for government agencies or certain types of nonprofit organizations. That's not affected by whatever happens with the Supreme Court. So PSLF is a separate program. The application is available online at studentaid.gov/PSLF. And please, please, please use the help tool when you're completing that application. The other program is the IDR adjustment. IDR stands for income-driven repayment. The income-driven repayment adjustment can allow a person to have up to the remaining balance of their student loan debt canceled if they satisfy the requirements of this program. There is no application for this. This is something that is ongoing with implementation expected to be visible on the borrower side in 2024. The only people who might have to do something, or not might, the only people who will have to do something if they want to get their loans considered as a part of the IDR adjustment are people that have commercially managed or commercially held loans. If you want those loans to be included in the IDR adjustment, you have to complete the application to consolidate those loans by December 31st of 2023. And because so much of this is linked to the Supreme Court decision, I just think it's best for people to wait until we hear from the Supreme Court, and we'll know how to proceed strategy-wise once that question is answered about the up to $20,000 worth of relief per eligible borrower. All right, so that actually wraps up all the questions that came in prior to this edition of Office Hours. I'm just going to check Facebook quickly to see if we have any questions that were submitted by way of comments. I don't see any there. Feel free to drop a question in the Q&A or in the comments on Facebook. And if you have any questions, I'll come back to those after I share with you some options for accountability. If you are having difficulties with your student loan servicer, of course, the best first action to take is to try to resolve it with your servicer, because they are your point of contact for issues with billing. But if you feel as though you're not getting anywhere trying to resolve the issue with the servicer, there are several outlets for you. The first is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB. You can visit them online at consumerfinance.gov. You can submit a complaint there, and usually organizations respond to those complaints within 15 days. Also, you can visit the U.S. Department of Education Ombudsman online, and you will find a list of very specific criteria for problems that are handled by the Ombudsman, and suggested actions for problems that are not handled by the Ombudsman. If you have a concern that is related to public service loan forgiveness, there's also the option to submit a PSLF reconsideration request. That's if you feel that your payment count is not accurate. I just want to tell you before you submit that, there are several cases in which your account might not be accurate just because of the way that the application process works. For instance, if you recently consolidated, your payment count is probably going to be very low because the first count only considers the repayment history of the newly created consolidation loan. Usually within 2 to 5 weeks, another more accurate count is found. So if you're in that time frame, you might not want to submit a reconsideration request just yet. You might want to wait a few weeks, come back, and if the count still doesn't seem up to date, or if you notice when you're looking at the payment summary that there are months that are missing, then you might want to go ahead and submit that PSLF reconsideration request. At the state level, Maryland is a state that has a student loan ombudsman, and they can help you with issues that you might experience with your student loan servicer that include failure by the servicer to communicate with the borrower, errors in crediting principal and interest payments, misapplied payments, inaccurate interest rate calculations, billing errors, loan consolidation or modification errors, and or inappropriate collection activity or tactics. And you can visit the Maryland Student Loan Ombudsman online at the Department of Labor's website. You can also find Maryland Student Loan Borrowers Bill of Rights, so you can learn about the protections to which Maryland's borrowers are entitled and the obligation of student loan servicers. And again, you can access both of those by visiting the state's Department of Labor. I see I've got a question in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and take that. It says, if a borrower has multiple loans and started working for a qualifier for the past 9 months, is such borrower required to start making payments on all loans in order for those payments to count toward PSLF, even though the repayment pause has not ended? Okay, excellent question. During the payment pause, if a person works for a qualifying employer, they don't have to make payments in order for the months to count as qualifying payments toward PSLF. So if you're in the payment pause and you're thinking, oh, I need to make payments because I'm pursuing public service loan forgiveness, you don't have to do that during the payment pause. The months that are in the payment pause can count toward public service loan forgiveness when the person has completed the PSLF application and documented that they're working for a qualifying employer. This is a question that I received from a borrower actually about a week ago. She was interested in making payments during the pause, thinking that it could accelerate her progress toward PSLF, but that's not the case. There's nothing that you can do to speed it up. It's a minimum commitment of 120 months. So even if a person has, multiple loans, if the loans are included in the payment pause, then all of those months can count toward PSLF as long as the person had qualifying employment. But about the multiple loan issue, if a person has multiple loans but of different types, let's say some of the loans are direct loans, which are federally held, and some of the loans are commercially held, which are the ones that had the private banks involved with the origination. Any payments that they made toward that commercially held loan would not count toward PSLF unless they consolidated the commercially held loans into the direct loan program. And if they had a lengthier history on those commercially held loans, consolidating those two groups of loans, the commercially held loans with the federally held loans, once those loans are put together, all of them would be given credit for the repayment history of the oldest loans in the portfolio. So if I had loans from 15 years ago and loans from 5 years ago, if I put them together through a consolidation, that consolidation loan would be credited with the repayment history of the 15-year loan. So if I've been working in public service for all of this time, then all of those loans could be forgiven immediately upon approval of me submitting an application that is approved. But the core of this question is the payment pause. If the loans are included in the payment pause, then you do not have to make payments for the months to count toward public service loan forgiveness. Okay, thank you for that question. Okay, all right, I don't have any other open questions at this point. If you still have questions, please do drop them in the Q&A and let me know. All right, so I thank you so much for joining me for this evening's edition of Office Hours. If you have any questions between this edition and our next edition, which is scheduled for June the 28th, please do visit us online at mccfw.org/contact, and we will make sure that we get back to you with answers to your questions. You can also connect with us on social media. We are on Twitter and Instagram, as well as Facebook at the MCCFW. We also have another event coming up. That is our third annual virtual symposium, Advancing Collegiate Financial Wellness as an Essential Ingredient for Student Success. That event will happen July 25th from 9 a.m. to noon, and registration is available on our website at mcfew.org if you visit the 2023 symposium page. All right, we've got another question. It's if a borrower's IDR anniversary was December of 2022, is the borrower required to provide proof of income even though the payment pause is still in place and the borrower also qualifies for an in-school deferment? Okay, so if the loans are in an in-school deferment, then repayment is not required. So you wouldn't have to provide any additional information to recertify, what your payment would be under that income-driven repayment plan. As for the recertification process, during this CARES Act forbearance that started in March of 2020, people who were enrolled in income-driven repayment plans were given multiple extensions for when they would have to recertify the answers to those questions. What's your adjusted gross income? How many people in your household? And what's your tax filing status? The period for having to recertify was extended with those extensions of the payment pause. So for your personal IDR anniversary date, if you were not experiencing that payment pause or the in-school deferment, your IDR anniversary is December of 2022. That means that the following anniversary, you would need to make sure that by December of 2023, you had provided the answer to those questions so that your repayment plan could be recertified properly. But with the in-school deferment, that's not a requirement. You could choose to opt out of an in-school deferment if you wanted to, but if you don't opt out of that in-school deferment, then you would not be required to recertify for the purposes of income-driven repayment, okay? All right. And we've still got a few minutes, so if you have any other questions, I am more than happy to hang out here and do my best to answer those questions for you. Office hours is held twice per month, usually on the 2nd and 4th Wednesday at 7 p.m. So if you have any questions between this edition and the next edition, please do reach out at mccfw.org/contact. The question is, can you please clarify if the new income-driven repayment plan has been approved? So the new income-driven repayment plan was set to go into effect July 1st, which is in just a couple of weeks. I cannot, I can't say I cannot. The plan was supposed to reduce the percentage of income that is dedicated toward a student loan payment. The plans that are out there right now usually take between 10 and 20% of a borrower's disposable income and consider that as available to go toward the student loan payment each month. This new income-driven repayment plan is supposed to reduce that percentage down to 5% and would also increase the amount of income that's protected from being considered as disposable. Right now, I cannot speak to that. July 1st is the date that I heard this was supposed to go into effect. And I also cannot speak with confidence on which borrowers would be able to access this plan. When I first heard about it, it was something that I heard about as being specifically for undergraduate borrowers, but in this very moment, I'm not comfortable giving you an answer on whether that plan is moving forward and who it's moving forward for. As far as I know, it will move forward, but I'm not comfortable right now saying fully, yes, I have a great understanding of this enough that I would share that with you in the moment. So I will definitely find out what's happening and what the plan is for implementation and who qualifies for that plan. That was the thing that was not as clear to me when I heard about this plan originally. So I will make sure that I reach out to you with details about the implementation of that new reduced income-driven repayment plan that's supposed to go into effect on July 1st. All right, let me check to see if we have any additional questions. All right. Oh, I just got a thank you note. Oh, thank you for submitting those questions. I truly appreciate your participation. It really, it helps us at the center really keep a pulse on what borrowers are going through and the types of questions that they have, and the things that are not being addressed clearly from a lot of these larger entities. So I really appreciate you sharing what's on your mind with us so that we can make sure that we're providing the best information possible and filling in those gaps when information is not clear. Okay, so thank you. All right, I've got no outstanding comments on Facebook, no questions in the Q&A at the moment. So we have got about 5 minutes left. I will hang tight for a couple more minutes and see if any questions come in. I'm happy to take them before we wrap up this edition of Office Hours. This is the time where I wish I had some background music. Something to play. I'm trying to think of any other questions that have come up recently. I'm getting a lot of questions from parents who are thinking about taking out a Parent Plus loan and who are also hearing from private lenders and wondering whether they should go with the Parent Plus loan or a private loan, or doing something like taking cash out of their retirement or taking equity out of their homes. Very personal decisions. I will say that my personal preference is to leave your retirement and your home alone and to explore benefits, perhaps at the state level, of course, scholarships at the institutional level. And when taking a look at those loans, really thinking about who you are comfortable with being responsible for the debt. If you take out a Parent Plus loan, you, the parent, are responsible for that debt. Yes, it's for your child's education, but you as the parent are responsible for the debt. If a private loan is involved, you as a parent could take out a loan in your own name, but your child could also take out a loan. You might be the co-signer on that loan. So when it comes to private loans, there's a bit more flexibility with who the borrower could be. If your child applies for one and they have no income and no assets, they're probably going to need a co-signer to get the private loan. So you would still be involved, but not primarily responsible. So think about who you ultimately want to be responsible for repaying the debt. Also, of course, you want to think about your capacity to repay. With the federal government, the terms are the same for everyone. With private lenders, those terms can vary by lender and vary by borrower. So there's a shop around factor that needs to be involved when you're looking at private loans. Either way, if you can avoid loans as a parent, that will be the ideal situation. If you find that you cannot avoid them, then I would encourage you, as I encourage any student who's borrowing for higher education, to really exhaust your federal eligibility first. And after federal loan eligibility has been exhausted, if you still need additional loans, then take a look at private loans. But the federal student loans are the ones that you should take first, with private loans being secondary if necessary at all. All right. Checking the Q&A and the comments on Facebook one final time. It looks like we are all clear, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off for this evening. I just want to thank you again for joining me for this, the June 14th edition of Office Hours. We will be back on Wednesday, June 28th at 7 p.m. for our next edition. If you have any questions in the meantime, again, visit us online at mccfw.org. YouTube.com/contact. You can submit your questions. We'll be in touch with answers. And also, by Friday, you can expect for this video to be uploaded to YouTube, and it will be annotated so that we can make sure that members of our community can just go straight to the YouTube channel, look at the video, and go straight to the content that concerns them. So we're at 7:59. I'm going to go ahead and sign off. As always, I appreciate you for joining me, and be well. Bye-bye.